Some 8,000 Bosnian men and boys were killed at Srebrenica in 1995. It took 8 years to create a proper cemetery. The Bosnian Serb soldiers who committed the massacre initially threw their victims into mass graves. And it's taken until today, more than a quarter of a century on, for a final verdict on the general who presided over the killings. 26 long and painful years for those who continue to mourn.
Ratko Mladic was ultimately responsible for all the crimes. He ordered the killings and he must be held accountable under international and divine law. It's important for future generations to show that genocide is unacceptable, to prevent a repeat of Mladic and his policy.
Today's appeal court session marked the end of the road for the man who became known as the Butcher of Bosnia.
For criminal tribunals is now in session.
Mladic, now aged 78, scowled as the court upheld his convictions for genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes.
Finding that Mr. Mladic is not guilty of genocide and...
The presiding judge, Zambian Priska Matimba Nyambe, dissented from the other 4 judges, but that makes no difference to the verdict nor the life sentence that Mladic must now serve. At Srebrenica, Mladic ordered Bosnian Serb soldiers to separate the men and boys from the women, take them away by bus and shoot them, in the worst war crime on European soil since World War II. He's also been found guilty of terrorizing the civilian population of the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo, during the 43-month siege, and of responsibility for ethnic cleansing. Mladic is the last of the main architects of the Bosnian genocide to be sentenced. The political leader of the Bosnian Serbs, Radovan Karadzic, is now serving a life sentence in the Isle of Wight, while the former Serbian leader, Slobodan Milosevic, died of a heart attack in 2006 in his prison cell. But an end to the legal process isn't enough.
It shouldn't end with this judgment. Something must be done so that the Serbian nation comes to realise and accept the truth. Without that, there's no reconciliation.
And that's the problem. Many Serbs still see themselves as victims, not perpetrators.
It's political. There's no justice here, just politics.
Today's verdict should lay history to rest. But as long as Serbs refuse to accept the guilt of their leaders, there's no agreed truth and no way forward.
Lindsay Hilson reporting. Earlier, I spoke to the UN Tribunal's chief prosecutor, Srebrenica, and I started by asking him if, in fact, that one of the judges dissented had damaged the verdict.
No, definitely not. You know what is important, that is that the majority of judges upheld the decision of the trial chamber. So Mladic has been convicted on all counts in relation to the siege of Sarajevo, in relation to the ethnic cleansing in an important number of municipalities, in relation to the hostage-taking of Blau helmets, but also, very importantly, in relation to the genocide in Srebrenica. So, in fact, the appeal of the defense was rejected in its entirety, and we are very satisfied.
It is incredible that it's taken 25 years. 25 years is an extraordinarily long time, is it not?
It is, but you know, if you work at the international level, you learn that justice delayed doesn't mean justice denied, because time is a very different and very important factor for us international prosecutors. Someone who is very powerful today, well, sometimes you have to wait for years before being able to arrest and prosecute individuals. Don't forget that Karadzic and Mladic were fugitives for many years. After the Dayton agreements, even after they had been put on international arrest warrants, they were still moving freely during a number of years in Serbia. So it took a number of years before it was even possible to get them arrested. The trial took a number of years because we speak about massive evidence, hundreds of testimonies, massive crimes. So it is a long time, but if you look at the cases we are dealing with, it is not really surprising. In Bosnia alone, there are still 3,500 identified perpetrators which need to be investigated and prosecuted.
Will they be after all this? Will will the organisation of justice in this form ever tolerate such a long trial, given there are so many people still to be prosecuted, as you say?
I really think that if one wants to give reconciliation a chance in the former Yugoslavia, it is absolutely necessary to continue accountability for the crimes committed. Because how can you move together as a society, have a common future, if you can really not agree on the past and if there's no accountability for the crimes committed? We see that there are a number of irresponsible politicians in all countries of the former Yugoslavia who are still using the hatred of the past to promote their nationalist agenda. But I don't think there's any alternative to continuing fighting for justice in the former Yugoslavia.
And then one wonders about the rest of the world. Are we ever going to see Assad prosecuted, for example? Almost certainly not. The fact is the international community hasn't moved against some of the tyrants since Mladic's day.
We are, as international prosecutors, very often having this kind of discussion to see where we are today in relation to international criminal justice. And we probably agree that in the 90s, when the Yugoslav Tribunal and the Rwanda Tribunal were created, there was definitely more international support for international criminal justice and for accountability. The sad reality today is that for the wars in Syria, in Yemen, in Myanmar, impunity is more the rule and accountability is the exception. That's an unfortunate reality. But there are still cases ongoing in Germany, in Belgium, in France, and other countries where a number of individuals allegedly responsible for massive crimes committed in Syria and other places are currently prosecuted. So while international criminal justice, like the international field in general, is very much under pressure, we need to remain optimistic, and we absolutely have to believe that international justice will stay high on the agenda of governments.